Hello, everyone, and welcome to another cartoon commentary. And this is a very exciting one for me. I'm getting to talk with Buzz Dixon again, doing commentary for G.I. Joe the movie. Buzz, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
So the last time we talked, it was for Rise Serpentor Rise Part 1, and you wrote that damn thing.
Yes.
And did you write this damn thing too?
I wrote this one.
I've been waiting so long to say that again. Yeah. Thank you for humoring me with that, silly.
That's okay. The origin was that Ron Friedman, excellent writer, very nice guy, wonderful guy, had a very good agent, and the agent got him a guarantee of solo written by credit on any G.I. Joe movie. And since animation is not covered by the Writers Guild, there is no arbitration committee that would decide what the actual final credit is. So Ron wrote a script for it, and Sunbow thought it didn't go in a direction they wanted it to go in. And they asked me to fly out to New York to talk with them about it. I was the story editor on the second season of G.I. Joe at that point. So they said, read the script on the airplane, and when you get here, tell us what you think. And when I got there, and this is no slam against Ron, I said, I think we would be better off just starting from scratch, creating a brand new script and going from there rather than trying to, fix what we perceive as weak spots in this one. Yeah. And they said, we're glad to hear that because that was our decision too. And so they asked me to write the second script for the G.I. Joe movie. The only character that carried over from Ron's script was Nemesis Enforcer, the big winged villain, who everybody loved. I got to say that was the most impressive character that he came up with.
Yeah.
And from there, I used the Cobra Law alternate origin of Cobra that I had come up with when they asked me to come up with an origin for Serpentor. So I have been told that Hasbro now views this as an alternate timeline story. This is not part of the official Joe continuity. It is an alternate universe G.I. Joe story, which is fine by me, because I honestly believe as much as I enjoyed writing this, as much as I enjoyed getting a chance to do a lot of sci-fi concepts, because I love science fiction, as much as I enjoyed that, I think we went a little too far in Cobra Law and things like that. I think we should have probably stuck with a more, for lack of a better word, terrestrial story. But this is the movie we ended up with, and over time I have come to to love it, because when we first did it, I could only see the flaws and the mistakes, and of course there was the frustration of it not getting a theatrical release and everything else. But now, decades later, I'm looking at it. I've seen it twice now in theaters with receptive audiences. And I realized, we achieved the mission. We were trying to make a good G.I. Joe movie that would entertain the fans, and by all accounts, the fans were entertained. So it worked.
And they just recently screened it for a bunch of audiences, and
yes,
and that was a great get together for Joe fans.
So, it was. Yeah, they had one out here, and I was invited to it, and it is so gratifying to be sitting there in the theater and hearing people react to things that you wrote, ideas that you came up with, and reacting the right way, not cringing into your seat reaction, but going, oh, thank you. I'm glad you appreciated that.
I'm looking forward to doing that today. And so we're all paused depending on which version of this movie you're watching. It might not have the Sunbow intro. So we have actually paused right after the Sunbow intro, and the star has just appeared. See a bunch of stars in the sky, and there's one big twinkling, sparkling star. That might be Duke's tooth right there off in the distance. We're paused on that. I'm going to give everyone a countdown from 3. It's going to be 3, 2, 1, play. And as my mouth says play, your finger is pressing play. Ready? 3, 2, 1, play. Let's see if I was right. No, it's the title. G.I. Joe. So I've said a couple of times publicly and probably many times privately, I'm not the biggest fan of this movie. I like parts of it, but all in all, it's kind of like what you were saying initially. It was hard to just love it all as a whole. But one thing I really do appreciate is the Joe aspect of the movie. I think this intro right here is incredible. I can just pop in and watch it up by itself.
I want to give full credit here to Larry Houston. You really ought to have him on and talk to him. He's got tons of stories about G.I. Joe, Transformers, and other animated shows he worked on. Larry did this entire thing. I wish I could claim even an iota of credit for it, but no, this is entirely Larry's doing. It is arguably the best action sequence ever done in any G.I. Joe media ever. And it's tons of fun. It sets up the conflict. It explains who the characters are. It gets you up and running. And it's the equivalent of a James Bond opening scene. It gets you fired up. It gets you ready for the movie. And then when the movie actually starts, you're sitting there going, okay, we know we're in for a good time. And this Larry delivers here. I mean, really just top-notch animation all the way through it. I cannot praise Larry enough for this.
And I wasn't planning on watching this again anytime soon, but there's a line in Lord of the Rings, something to the effect of when you're marching into Mordor, not a pleasant experience, but if the company is good.
Yeah.
So I can't think of a better person to watch it with than the man who wrote the damn thing.
Well, thank you.
So one of the things before he even shows up in the movie here is the Green Beret, Lieutenant Falcon. And I just did a big retrospective on Lieutenant Falcon and how the Green Beret are perceived in the Army. They're the cream of the crop, the best of the best. And above all, the thing I really wanted to ask you was, I get what the idea was to have a redemption story for a screw up who, comes of age and saves the day, much like Hot Rod in the Transformers movie. But a Green Beret, it's such a stretch for me to think that, someone like Colonel Troutman or Rambo or the A-Team can sleaze and connive his way into a Green Beret and then into G.I. Joe on top of that.
No offense, but if you were going to accept giant fungus shooting spores into space, you're straining at a gnat over Lieutenant Falcon, let's be honest.
Yeah, there is a lot to accept, but
I mean, you are absolutely right, and this is one of the things that we had with G.I. Joe the TV series as well. If you applied absolute realism to this whole thing collapses.
Yeah, it falls apart.
It cannot operate in the real world. You can't have Cobra staging these massive assaults all over the world, surprise attacks. My God, you have any idea about the kinds of support, logistics, everything else? There's no way to keep something like that secret.
Yeah.
Larry, touched on this in the comics, I believe. Cobra has allies in the real world that will protect it, and Cobra is able to commit its terrorist acts because
they're entrenched in the government
is constrained from going after them 100% because of other political shenanigans going on. Which, give Larry credit. That's a great idea, and it's one that I wish we could have hinted at in the TV show. But we were asked to keep real world politics out of it as much as possible. I think
that's a good policy for toys today and toy shows as well.
I think we had a brief flirtation with the Red Guard or something like that. Russian equivalents of G.I. Joe that we were showing, hey, not all Russians are bad, and
the October Guard.
October, that was it, yeah. And historically, I know there's all kinds of hell breaking loose in Ukraine now, and I am not whitewashing Russia at all. Russia has had, they have had courageous people. You read some of the stories about the resistance against the Nazi invasion. And these are just incredibly brave, dedicated, loyal, patriotic to Russia, soldiers. And I do not fault anyone who is defending their country. I may find fault with people who invade somebody else's country, but anyone who is within their borders defending their country, I can't, I cannot criticize that person.
Mm-hmm.
I see on the screen, we've got our confrontation between Serpentor and Cobra Commander. And this is something that we had going throughout the series. If you remember from Arise, Serpentor, Arise, Cobra Commander manages to stay in the organization by pointing out to Serpentor, you've got a weakness. You are too impulsive, and you're going to screw up. And when you screw up, you're going to need a scapegoat. And I'm it.
I'm the goat.
I'm the goat, yeah. But I mean, that lets him stay in the chain of command. That lets him, have some authority, some control. So this is playing off of that. For the kids, the intent was that the kids who came in to see this, having seen 2 seasons of G.I. Joe in reruns and everything else, they know instantly what the power dynamics were here, what the relationship dynamics were. This sequence when Pythona first arrives, this was, as you'll see, Cobra Commander is going to use this as a chance to try to set Serpentor up for assassination. He has no idea this is Pythona. He knows, as you will see in the course of the story, he knows who Pythona is, but he doesn't realize this is Pythona, and he just thinks it's an assassin come after Serpentor, and he's perfectly happy to let Serpentor get bumped off at this point.
Was Pythona one of your creations?
Pythona was one of my creations. Globulus was one of my creations. The ancillary characters, the various warriors and whatnot of Cobra Law, I probably just referred to them as pilots or soldiers or something like that. And Marvel Animation did the design work on it, or maybe Hasbro did the design work on it. But we were basing this on everything we had done up to this point, and we were trying to make this as exciting and as close to a live action movie as we possibly could in terms of staging, plot lines, and things like that. And now, here we get into, well, we've already gotten into it. We're into the completely science fictional aspect of the story now.
Almost alien type of.
Yeah, she's melting her way through a 2-foot thick steel door
with her nails.
Great staging here. I mean, the animation and the staging, the layouts, everything about this is just really well done. And I have absolutely no complaints in that area, because they really knocked themselves out doing a great job.
You mentioned earlier going a bit too far, and what I look at this movie now as that I never had before is it's more enjoyable if I look at it not as a G.I. Joe movie, but G.I. Joe and Humanoids crossover. As soon as they added that piece of the recipe, wait a second, this is Inhumanoids. We're not seeing Matlar and Decompose, but it's basically Inhumanoids style. What is it called again?
That you had been around at that time, because then we could have pitched that. We could have said, they had killed the Inhumanoids toy line at that point, but we could have certainly alluded to it, and that would have been a hell of a lot better than Cobra Law. I mean, yeah. I honest to goodness, I thought when they were coming up with names for Serpentor, he was first Cobra Emperor, and then briefly he was King Cobra, and I didn't say a word about it when they called him King Cobra, because as I mentioned earlier, the idea of naming a villain after a malt liquor, all right, fine by me.
Voiced by Billy D. Williams.
Yeah, but then eventually they settled on Serpentor. And, you know, the Cobra Law thing, I used Cobra Law as a direct reference to Shangri-La, which is the most famous lost civilization in literature. It's from James Hilton's classic novel, Lost Horizon. Beautiful book. The original 1930s version, if you can track that down, watch it. It is a great fantasy, not high fantasy with dragons and wizards and stuff, but just it's a really good fantasy film. And I thought, surely their legal department will go, well, of course we can't call it Cobra Law because it's obviously Shangri-La. We can't do that. And they fell in love with it. And I was begging them, no, let me come up with a better name. Better, but no.
You should have said Eternia.
Yeah. I tell people now, come up with something they absolutely can't use, like, Festering Monkey Hemorrhoid Island or Granny's Body House. Anything that you obviously cannot use as a placeholder name, because otherwise you're stuck with it.
Yeah.
I mean, that happens. I've been writing some novels, and that happens to me with some of the characters in the novels. I come up with a name, and I look at the name and I go, well, this is kind of a bland name, but until I think of something better, I'm just going to use it. And by the time I get to the end, it's like, it's this character's name now. I'm not going to find anything better.
I really like how Serpentor is the savage beast, and he's calmed. She tames the savage beast, and it's just this intrinsic thing he feels. And he's a man who cannot be rationalized with. You can't you can't reason with Serpentor, but she calms him more than anyone ever has up to this point. And it's just because he senses that where she's from is a major piece, that missing piece of him that drives him so mad.
The implication we were trying to get to was that when they implanted the information in Dr. Mindbender's mind in Arise Serpentor Arise on how to create Serpentor, at the same time he didn't know it, but he was also providing a way for them to have kind of this I hate to use the term because it's been misused so often, but racial memory, for lack of a better word, that he would instinctively know who these people were, what they were. He would just recognize it when he saw them. But he would have no conscious knowledge of it until he saw them. He had no idea who Pythona was until he saw her for the first time. Mm-hmm. Now, the broadcast energy transmitter, this is one of the science fiction devices that we included. And if I recall, we retrofitted the broadcast energy transmitter into the story after the outline was approved, because I forget how we actually got started originally with the movie. Originally Pythona comes in, but I forget what the next beat was. And then when we get to the end of the movie and we got to figure out how to destroy the spores, I thought, well, if there was some way to broadcast energy into space and fry them, and I thought, well, there have been experiments with broadcast energy. Let's give the Joes something to do. Let's go out in the Himalayas, and they're testing this thing out. Why would G.I. Joe be testing it in the Himalayas? I don't know. I mean, don't ask too many questions. And
Snow job and frostbite were lonely.
Exactly, and once we created the BET, then we had a MacGuffin to, for Cobra to be chasing after. Yeah. We had a device to nullify the threat at the end, and we also had something to kick the story off with. So it wasn't the first draft, if I remember correctly, it wasn't the first draft of the outline that the BET was in, but probably the second draft. We realized, that ties everything in together real nicely, and it gives us a logical spine that goes all the way through the story.
It's kind of like the epilogue for the regular Sunbow show pre-Cobra Law. For me, this is the final big bash that doesn't involve the sci-fi kind of Inhumanoids, H.P. Lovecraft style of monsters, and it's one of my favorite sequences in the movie.
You can absolutely view it that way. along those lines, years ago when I think it was Stars, they had the uncut, or rather the director's cut of Aliens. And I used my VCR to create the ultimate Aliens film. I had Alien, and then it segued directly into the director's cut of Aliens.
Yeah, with the intro.
Yeah, the scene where Ripley wakes up from a nightmare. Just before she wakes up from a nightmare, I took all the good scenes from Alien Cubed, and stuck them in there like it was that was the nightmare. So there's like a 5 or 10 minute sequence that I had where she's got this nightmare of all this weird alien stuff going on, and then she wakes up, and I thought, well, that fixes the problem. I mean, it leaves, in my mind, it leaves Newt still alive,
and Hicks,
happy ending.
Bishop is still, not destroyed, and Hicks is still alive. Yeah, that's.
I'm not going to talk about the Aliens movies because
we might have to every now and then. One question I want to ask you: one of my favorite moments in the movie is when Duke hits the ground and that shot just grazes his arm. We hadn't really seen anything like that in the previous episodes. It's always everyone's missing, and parachuting out of their jets. Yeah, and we can see the damage right there on his jacket. Did you write that in the script, that like a near miss? Because even though
I think I did, I'm not going to swear to it, because if I didn't, I didn't. But I may have written that. I do know I was advocating for a long time. We can't make it conflict without consequences.
Yeah.
And in almost every script that I wrote, I tried to work in some line where we refer to casualties.
Oh, do you smell bacon?
Excuse me?
Do you smell bacon? Serpentor. Sorry, that's Serpentor. Sorry, what were you saying?
I was just saying, I always tried to work in some reference to casualties. Hasbro didn't realize when you say casualties, you're referring to injured and dead.
Yeah.
I always tried to show somebody gets hurt in every episode. Now, of course, they bounce back. They're in perfect shape in the next episode. But, I tried to have, Doc or Lifeline taking care of somebody, or somebody being helped off the field after a battle, limping or something like that. I didn't want it to be just sanitized, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And it's a precursor. He's a lot worse is going to happen to Duke later on, but it's nice to see Serpentor captured for a change instead of Duke. Thank you so much for not writing Duke being captured. It's become a running joke. Duke always gets captured. And that comic book they just wrote that is like in the universe of the cartoon, Duke gets captured again. So it's refreshing that he's not the one captured this time.
Yeah. We actually we did joke characters around the office, and we had one Fodder who was this big, hefty guy, and he had a big bullseye on his chest to draw the fire away from the other Joes. And we had General Hawk's driver, a rather buxom female G.I. Joe, whose nom de guerre was. And we also had hostage. That was another one. We had one guy who his job was to be the hostage and just get captured. In fact, when the battles would start, they'd send him over at the start. Okay, you got to go over and surrender. Now, this, I'm going to be honest. I was inspired by both Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers and Larry Niven's Known Universe stories. Larry Niven's Known Universe stories postulate that there was an ancient intelligent race that originally colonized the galaxy, and on millions of planets throughout the galaxy, they have planted these things called booster trees. And they're essentially solid fuel rockets that grow like trees. So if you're ever crash land on some world, and you desperately need to get back into space, you just cut down a couple of booster trees, strap them to your spaceship, and zoom, you're back into space. Heinlein had, I forget exactly what they were. I don't want to say they were fungus, but he had some organic way of the aliens fighting back against Earth, bombarding Earth, in Starship Troopers. And I kind of melded the two together there. I thought it would be interesting to, just show a technology that was not based on metal, on wood, not shaped wood, but living, organisms. So this is where we get really science fiction-y. And, this is where, I was a science fiction fan when I was a teenager. I've written science fiction. I've been published in science fiction magazines. This was just a lot of fun to be able to write these science fiction concepts and finally, get a chance to actually see something like this on screen. There we go.
Oh,
there's Nemesis.
One of my favorites.
Yeah.
One of my favorites is Snow Job.
Yeah.
Especially tough as a kid watching this because the Joes just get routed. I mean, they get creamed by these guys. And they've never been handled this easily ever on the show.
Well, they are caught by surprise. They are attacked with a technology that they are not familiar with. They have not had a chance to fight back against them and figure out defenses. One of the things that logically happens throughout the course of the film is that bit by bit, the Joes figure out how you counter these people, how you fight back, how you can defeat them. But it's not,
That's the whole point of a movie. It's a learning experience.
Right. I dislike fantasy and science fiction and adventure stories where it's too easy, where, the protagonist or the team of protagonists just easily defeat every obstacle that comes, in their way. You've got to give them something to resist, something to fight against. And, we're introducing brand new bad guys.
Was that a Freudian slip?
Yeah, that's a Freudian slip. Brand new bad guys. And we want to show them as a credible threat. I mean, we want the audience to realize also, in purely pragmatic terms, Hasbro at the time did not realize how deeply these characters resonated with their audience.
Yeah.
They thought they could just constantly put new G.I. Joes in the mix and the kids would constantly buy new ones. And they found out you can't do that because the kids develop favorites and they want to see those favorites. You can sell all kinds of variants on them, but the kids don't want to fall in love with a brand new set of characters every 6 months or every year.
Yeah.
So the objective was they wanted to get as many of the original Joes out of the scene as possible early on so they could focus on the new characters that they brought in, the new characters and the characters that they were carrying over. So everybody who got caught in that sequence was originally slated to go out of the product line. And like I said, the fans have demonstrated you don't want to do that. You want to keep all of them around. They may not be available every product issue, but you definitely want to, sweeten the pot and bring them back because I don't care how obscure the character is, there's somebody that it's their favorite character.
Psych out. And I was just about to ask you, did they give you a list of the new rawhides, these guys right here, the new recruits? Or did you have any freedom? Like we don't see guys like Psych Out, Fast Draw, Crazy Legs in this lineup. Did they just say these are the only guys you can use?
These are the ones they handed me. I think, and I am not going to swear to this, I may be misremembering, so don't take
it's
me
been
by
a while.
name. Yeah, Jinx, I think the name was there. Law and Order, I may have come up with that. I'm not 100% sure. Chuckles, I think I came up with that nickname. Big Lob, I think they gave me that name, and I forget. Oh, this is Tunnel Rat, right?
Tunnel Rat, yeah.
Yeah. I think Tunnel Rat was one they came up with as well.
One thing I was going to ask you too is the Cobra Law guards. Did you come up with those as well, or were they already in place?
I I came up with them to the degree of, I would say, you've got soldiers, you've got guards, you've got pilots, and I let the art crew devise what they wanted to do, or under Hasbro's supervision, what they wanted to do.
So in terms of walking into a toy store, Globulus was one you came up with.
Yeah.
Do you remember seeing a Globulus figure, and after having had to write so many characters that were given to you, here, this is an established character, make him say something, there's a character you actually came up with pretty much from scratch?
because Globulus, to manufacture him, he is one of the more expensive toys to put together. Going back to Inhumanoids for a moment, one of the reasons Inhumanoids flopped as a toy line was that they cost about $20 to buy one. G.I. Joes were like, at the time, $3.50 to $5. So a kid on their own could go into a toy store and buy a G.I. Joe. But a kid would need his mom's permission to buy, an Inhumanoid, one of the monsters. And the moms were looking at the monsters and going, no, this is not coming home with us. You can have the guy in the power suit, you cannot have the monster. And the moms fail to realize, well, the appeal of the show is the monsters. It's how gross they are. That's why the few monster toys that seem to be successful are like Garbage Pail Kids, the Weirdos. I don't know if you remember the Weirdos from the 1960s. They were a line of models, and I can't remember if they were Monogram or Lindbergh models. I can't recall at this point. But they were just like all these weird characters driving vehicles, motorboats, jet planes, all kinds of weird stuff. And they were done in a very cartoony style. But they were monsters. I mean, they had like big noses and fangs and all kinds of stuff. But they were goofy, funny looking monsters. So, the moms would go, oh boy, all right, fine, you can have that. Inhumanoids, we just got too scary. We went too deep into H.P. Lovecraft territory.
The translucent belly, watching the victim digest it in real time.
Yeah.
This is such a great scene for Beachhead, probably his best animated sequence of the whole show. Just him training the rawhides and slowly losing his mind and dealing with them.
Beachhead, I mean, I have mixed feelings towards Beachhead in this sense, because on the one hand, he's the obnoxious drill sergeant, you never liked when you were in the military. On the other hand, he's got a lot of responsibilities on his shoulder. He's like, I'm trying to remember, third or fourth in command or something like that.
Yeah, he's behind Flint.
Yeah. And he's not, he is too straight and too tightly wound to really be a G.I. Joe. He's doing the job. He's working as hard as he can, but he's really not into it. You know what I mean?
He's like the old man, even though he's not that old. Dude, kids today.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so I have, like I said, I've got kind of mixed feelings to him, because on the one hand, he's like always bossing around, telling people what to do. On the other hand, that's his job. I mean, and
he's good at it.
People will suffer if he isn't on top of his job. So
in the Lieutenant Falcon tribute video I did, I actually replaced the voice of Don Johnson, who did a fine job, but I used John Wayne from the Green Berets.
Oh boy!
And I said, in a what if scenario, what if Don Johnson voiced Chuckles instead, and Chuckles was more like Sonny Crockett from Miami Vice? Because I look at that and I think Sonny Crockett.
Look, I mean, this was one of the things that when they showed me the character, I kind of rolled my eyes. I was going, really? Miami Vice? I mean, I know it's a popular show, but we don't have to imitate everything that's currently popular. And it's one of the things that I think dates the show a bit. I mean, dates this movie a bit, is that it is such a direct reference to 1980s cop shows. And we really didn't need Chuckles. I mean, he provides muscle in a couple of places, but he really doesn't have a job, if you know what I mean. He's not doing any undercover work. He doesn't reveal anything. And simply because there wasn't room in the story for that.
Wrong place, wrong time. And he doesn't have a single line.
Yeah. Now, I'll also say this. I'm not saying this to be critical of whoever designed Jinx. I wish somebody who was a little more familiar with anime style had taken a swing at designing her. We had this problem on Thundar the Barbarian when we were doing this for Ruby Spears about 1980. We had Ariel, who is an Asian sorceress who is riding along with these adventures with Thundar. And the network was sending us, I am not kidding you when I say this, they were sending us morgue photos of dead Asian women saying, well, we don't want to go into the stereotype of beautiful Asian women. We want to be realistic Asian women. And it's like, you're sending us grandmas who dropped dead on the street. I mean, for heaven's sakes. And, I said, I'm married to a Korean. Look at her. Is she unattractive? No. So we finally got the network there to go, oh, okay, all right, you can make her look good. There's something about the physiology of Jinx's face that, to me, doesn't quite work. And if somebody watching this goes, well, I think she's great, that's fine. This is just my opinion, Yeah. And
we're still allowed to have opinions.
I'm not telling you you're wrong if you like. I will never yuck on anybody's yum, to use the term that's going around. If there's anything you enjoy, as long as it doesn't involve harming kids or animals, you go ahead and enjoy it. That's my philosophy when it comes to entertainment.
That's a good one. Some people with opinions seem to forget other people are allowed to have them too. And I get what you're saying, because I always thought Jinx, I know she's supposed to be Japanese, but just a quick look at her, and I always thought she was Spanish. So it might have been the hairdo, spicy Latina type of look to her, maybe the attitude as well.
I mean, for heaven's sakes, I was a big fan of Hong Kong action movies at the time. I enjoyed anime, and I could have shown them dozens of examples from both genres of, this is how they do it. This is how they see themselves. Maybe apply that. I mean, that look right there, she's supposed to have kind of this expression. It's not flattering in my eyes.
So did Hasbro ask you to make Falcon the star of the movie, or was that your choice?
No, that was my idea. Okay. In fact, originally Falcon was supposed to be General Hawk's son. You see the link, Falcon, Hawk. That was where we came up with it. And at some point, somebody said, no, we can't have the general screwing up, by covering up for his son. We can let Duke cover up for his brother. Somehow that was more acceptable. Now, we just zoomed past the never to be seen nude scene that we originally storyboarded. When she gets to the lake and she takes off her sundress, in the script and in the original storyboard, she's wearing panties, but she's not wearing anything above the waist. You don't see anything because, it's shot from behind. But at the last minute, Hasbro got cold feet, and all of a sudden, magically, this bathing suit appears underneath.
I love that he just throws a pillow. He's got one thing in the room with him, and he destroys it.
Yeah.
He gave him a pillow.
Since this movie came out, we have seen in the Marvel universe and in the James Bond movies and everything else, all these elaborate prisons. And I'm not saying that they imitated us, because we were tapping into the well of Silence of the Lambs and Manhunter. I don't know how many people listening to this remember, but the first time Hannibal Lecter appeared on screen was in a movie called Manhunter, which is a really good movie. Track it down.
Yeah, before Anthony Hopkins played the role.
Exactly, before Anthony Hopkins. And both Hopkins' cell in Silence of the Lambs and the cell in Manhunter are both just creepy places to keep people, but creepy for exactly opposite reasons. In Silence of the Lambs, it's a high-tech dungeon. in Manhunter, it's like he's a lab rat in a cage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is just this gleaming white, featureless. You'd go in. A normal person would go insane in such an environment.
Mm-hmm. Here comes the Cobra Law agents to rescue Serpentor. And we just saw a little bit of what makes Falcon kind of hard to take for a lot of Joe fans. He's very, very pushy and touchy-feely with Jinx. I guess because they used to date, and it's not quite the same as just a guy hitting on a person he's never met at a bar, but still a little awkward to be so hands-on.
There was a lot of give and take on that. And you bring up a valid point. At some point, I think Hasbro suggested that they have some history, that they had dated at one time. So he is not being overly familiar. He has held her in his arms, so to speak, before. They have had a past relationship. You shouldn't, if you've broken up with your girlfriend, don't put your hands on her. Okay, that goes without saying today. But at that time, it was considered acceptable.
Well, and also kind of makes him a scumbag, which is part of his redemption arc.
Exactly. Also, remember, this is the mid-'80s. There was still a different attitude towards things. I don't know if you're familiar with a movie called How to Murder Your Wife. It was done in like 1963, 64. And it's a movie there was only like a 6-month window that it could be released. And the reason for that was if they had released it before, it would have been rejected as being too offensive. And if they had released it 6 months later, it would have been passé. But it landed right in the saddle where it could be seen as kind of edgy, but not overly offensive. And when you see the movie today, even though individual scenes are funny, you're kind of going, this is not really a very nice story, is it? They are treating this woman here like a piece of property, a piece of meat. She is something to be used and enjoyed and tossed away. And the hero Jack Lemmon redeems himself by the end of the movie. But he redeems himself in such a way. There's a courtroom scene where he basically makes the argument that husbands should be allowed to murder their wives if the wives are too bossy. And I mean, you look at this and you go, this really doesn't fly.
I see what you were trying to do, but I don't know if you actually accomplished it.
Exactly, yeah. Now here we get into a little more detail on Cobra Law. I also drew influence from Nausicaa, which is like one of my favorite Japanese animes. I would hope everybody is familiar with Nausicaa. If not, the way I describe it is it's Dune with fungus.
Oh.
And it takes place on a futuristic world, possibly Earth, possibly another planet, where in the aftermath of a war, these vast forests of fungus have just covered the planet, and humanity is reduced to like a handful of valleys where they can keep the fungus out. And the point of the film is learning to coexist with this new nature that is surrounding the humans. There's a lot of stuff in that I drew inspiration from, the kinds of creatures they had, the monsters, things like that. I didn't want to one-to-one emulate them, but I did want to, capture that kind of feeling, bring that to an American story.
I saw the Inhumanoids connection, but I didn't even think of that. The organization of Cobra Law and the ritual and ceremony is very Dune-like, and got the blue eyes in behind there on the random soldiers. They're very Dune-like.
Yeah. Well, that was another influence too. And you can see here as Globulus is floating along, you see why he would have been an expensive toy to make. He's got this
The pod.
shell, and then inside the shell, he's got this incredibly long tail, and that would have been expensive to manufacture. So
Well, they never made the pod, but they did make the figure with a tail. He
Yeah.
came in a 3-pack with Nemesis Enforcer and the guard, but part of a 3-pack, so you couldn't even just get him on his own. So it was expensive, like I said.
Yeah. Now, that wasn't the scene where we get the flashback to
The origin of Cobra Commander.
Cobra Commander. Yeah, I'll talk on that in a bit.
Boy, they really put the boots to Falcon here. Well deserved, but he is such a colossal screw up.
Yeah. And I don't know if you could see it, but when you zoom in, well, now you get shots. That's Admiral Flagg. There's a couple of other
Or Ledger.
high-ranking Joe officers on the court martial, and I was trying to do this as close to a real-life court martial as we could possibly do. I mean, obviously, when you're doing a film of any kind or an animated film in particular, you have to take shortcuts. You leave stuff out. If you've ever watched video of a real court proceeding, it meanders along. It's not this rapid boom, 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 boom like it in the movies. There's back and forth. There's chit chat. We couldn't show it realistically, so we had to do it in a stylized way. And you're allowed to get away with it if you do it in a consistently stylized way. Yeah.
So have you seen the new Tom Cruise movie, Top Gun Maverick?
No, I haven't. I haven't even seen Top Gun, to be honest with you.
Well, there's a scene, to not spoil too much, but there's a scene where Tom Cruise pulls the file. He impedes the progress of one of the pilots for his own good, because he feels like he's not ready, and that's a tough job. And if you're not cream of the crop, then you might die. And so in the movie, it's a tough call for him to do, and he sacrifices his relationship with the young pilot.
Yeah.
So you wonder, well, what if he had just let the pilot, go about his business without Tom Cruise's Maverick interfering? And we get to see that in this movie. If he had just gone to bat for him, and it's not necessarily a good thing either. Duke basically, going to bat for Falcon is, I would think Duke went to bat for him to get his foot in the door in the first place, which led us to the point we're at, which really pulls Duke down, unfortunately.
It does. And this again is where you've got these realistic things that when you start thinking about them too seriously, they undermine the enjoyment of what you're watching.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of old movie serials, of old B movies, and I will be the first to admit, if they applied the real world to some of these things, the story comes to a screeching halt in 5 minutes.
The trap that we constantly fall into, especially with the Sunbow stuff, is that there is such intelligence and creativity to it. It's so much more than you would think it was, and maybe even so much more than it had really, than it should have been. And so we kind of think it's this actual, higher level than it was intended to be. And that's where the trap comes in. Then you start applying that to everything. And there's many, many brilliant parts, but that doesn't mean the whole thing is, without holes. Yeah.
Now, this scene here, there is a episode of G.I. Joe that I either wrote or story edited, where I included a scene where Cobra Commander is eating and Destro comes in.
I remember.
Oh, put the mask on. And, at the time, Hasbro asked me, what's under the mask? And I said, I have no idea, but I just want to establish it's not pleasant.
It was a mustache.
Yeah.
Crumbs.
And when we're doing the movie, I thought, well, what can we do that, I don't want to go into the standard scarred, visage thing. Everybody's done that.
Yeah.
And Globulus here has got kind of a, something wrong with his face. So I said, well, let's, if Globulus is missing an eye, let's give Cobra Commander too many eyes.
So that was actually one of your ideas, the actual visual aspect of
Yeah.
what he looks like.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, definitely Lots of Eyes is creepy. I was a big fan of Sectars, and one of the creepiest creatures from Sectars is the tarantula, which has too many eyes.
Yeah, there's like I forget the name of it, but there is a phobia about too many eyes.
Yeah. So like you said earlier, and in one of the other commentaries, this wasn't your initial idea, and you wrote a whole novel about your other idea that you would have preferred to do, The Most Dangerous Man in the World, in which Cobra Commander had a very different origin.
Yeah, there is what you're seeing is the booster trees influence from Larry Niven, combined with Heinlein's organic way of projecting things into space in Starship Troopers.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and once again, it takes me back to Inhumanoids with Decomposed turning people into these mindless zombies.
Oh yeah,
a fate worse than death.
Yeah, yeah. And this is right here. This idea, I'm going to go all the way back to the movie version of King of the Rocket Men. The serial King of the Rocket Men ends with the bad guy actually firing his death ray and destroying New York. You watch the serial, he wipes out New York. And when they were putting it together for television release as a feature film, somebody realized the hero looks like a schmuck because New York gets wiped out. So they added a line of dialogue where he says, once I fire this, and as he's describing firing it, then we get all the stock footage from the movie Deluge where this tidal wave wipes out New York. So I thought, well, that's a good idea. We can have our cake and eat it. We can show what they're intending, and get all the fun of people mutating and riots in the street and everything. And at the same time, we don't actually have it happen. We now have something to fight against as the Joes progress in the story.
And just to give us a taste of an actual tangible mutation, here's our poor beloved Cobra Commander, a fate worse than death. And this was another bitter pill to swallow for me. Like, even though he was the main villain, it's just horrible to see what has become of him.
This is based on a short story idea I had decades ago. Never actually got around to writing it. But the idea was that there would be a, white supremacist type, and there would be an African-American guy trapped in a forest fire, and the white supremacist would be blind, and the African-American would have a broken leg or something, and they have to cooperate with each other in order to escape the forest fire. And if anybody out there is saying, well, that sounds like the Defiant Ones, yeah, it pretty much is. I never got around to writing it, but it was just, it was an idea that had been percolating in the back of my head. So when Roadblock has to team up with Cobra Commander, that's where that idea, finally, found voice, so to speak.
It's a good combination too. Roadblock is known for his brawn, and having him blinded, and Cobra Commander isn't good for much anymore, other than he can still see it's a interesting team up.
Yeah.
Mercer.
Yeah. Now, I'm pretty sure I was given the names of all of these characters.
Mercer, Taurus, and Red Dog?
I may have contributed one or two names. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not going to claim that I did. But these characters were all presented as fully designed and with background histories already. So like I said, I cannot remember, and so I'm not going to lay claim to any of them.
What's interesting to me,
but I didn't do anything creative in them.
What's interesting to me about this is they were Hasbro was all about moving, like you said, the old product off and introducing you to the new product. And Sergeant Slaughter is kind of feels like a new character in this movie, even though he's been in the entire third season. He should, by all rights, kind of be falling to the back, kind of like Beachhead is and Flint and Duke. But here he is. He's one of the stars of the movie, name featured at the very beginning. And I wonder, was that because Sarge signed a multi-year deal?
It was that, and the fact that he was a major star in pro wrestling at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, once he signed the deal with Hasbro, every time he entered the ring, they played the G.I. Joe theme and they were waving American flags. So he was like an advertising, I don't want to say gimmick, because he was not a gimmick. We found uses for the Sarge. Bob Remus just if you're ever at a convention and the Sarge is there, look him up. He is tons of fun. He's a great guy to work with. He had all these wonderful stories about wrestling and other things. Sarge is a really nice guy. I mean, just of all the people I've worked with, he's in the top 10% of really super cool people I've worked with. So
a true professional.
Yeah, really, really. And the Sarge, when I say sold the toy, I don't mean that in the sense of, here, go buy the toy. He sold it in the sense of his persona just broke through, and it was like, oh yeah. That got people's attention. It got them following the show. It got them buying the toys. The Sarge earned his paycheck. Okay,
he was proud to be a G.I. Joe. He didn't say, oh, I'm in this toy thing and kind of fluff it off. I remember the very first commercial that he appeared in for the mail away toy, and Sarge was a big screaming rambunctious wrestler, but in the mail away commercial he's kind of subdued. Sergeant Slaughter here, and it does me proud to be part of the G.I. Joe team, and just kind of his tone that I take this very seriously, even in the commercial.
He could act. Okay, Olivier, no, not that, but he could act. He could convince you. And in a few places, if I remember correctly, he did a few extra voices for us.
Oh, really?
Like we would have, the recording session, they'd say, oh, we need a civilian yelling, look out. And so he'd go, okay, I can do that. And he'd change his voice a little bit and yell, look out.
Pinch his nose, look out.
Exactly, yeah. Like I said, true professional. This guy was... he's a really cool guy. That's all I can say. The Sarge is just tons of fun to be with. And here we once again get the last. These are the Joes that are going out of the toy line, and we've got to incapacitate them for the rest of the movie. So they get ambushed here.
So this is so cool to be able to ask the guy who wrote the thing. Did you intend Cobra Commander's transformation to be permanent, or just something he'd walk off after a couple of weeks?
I intended it to be permanent.
Yeah.
Charles Michael Hill came up with a follow-up season to the movie and the second season that I story edited. And it was going to involve the remnants of Cobra trying to reassemble themselves, Cobra Commander trying to, regain his form. And it was a really good presentation. And then they handed the project over to Deke, and
they deked it.
Yeah, they deked it. I did not work on the Deke show. They gave me a phone call and said, well, we know you worked on the previous one. Would you like to write some episodes? And I said, sure, here's my price. Oh, we can't meet that. And I said, well, best of luck. And I didn't work on it because we couldn't come to terms on price. I mean, I'm not going to, if I'm getting paid one amount to write scripts for Sunbow, why, for the exact same show, should I accept less money from Deke?
Yeah, absolutely. And you definitely get what you pay for. The Deke series is very, very difficult for me to watch.
It's good for do it cheaply. I don't know how familiar you or your listeners are with the history of Deke. Deke started in France. It did a couple of shows like I think Lost Cities of Gold, and I think Inspector Gadget. And they were originally a good, dependable animation company.
Yeah, they did a few good episodes of Mask.
Yeah. And then Andy Hayward got involved in it. And Andy, the joke was when Andy got involved, the name of the company, DIC, now meant Do It Cheaper. Mm-hmm. And the way they operated was like this. If it costs $600,000 to do a typical episode, and that's about how much a G.I. Joe episode costs to animate. Voices, animation, editing, post, all of it together, about $600,000. If it costs $600,000 for in real money for an animation company to do that, Deke would underbid and say, "Oh, we can do that for $500,000." So they'd get a show order, and they'd still have to spend $600,000 on it, but they're going to run out of money because they don't have enough budget to finish the show. Yeah. So then they go out and they sell 2 other shows. And they say, "Oh, we can do these shows for $500,000, for $400,000 too." Well, or $500,000. So they get 2 more shows lined up, and they take money from those 2 shows and apply them to the first show, which is so they can, meet their budget. But now those 2 shows are even deeper in a deficit. So now they have to sell 4 shows and then 8 shows. And eventually what happened was they just saturated the market. They were selling shows at ridiculously low prices to, all over the place. They flooded the market with product.
And they robbed kids of quality programming that Sunbow had provided for years.
Yeah. And, as you say, you get what you pay for. I have seen well-made, low-budget animated shows where from the very beginning, everybody understood what the financial limitations were. Everybody worked within that. There was a series on MTV about the same time we were doing G.I. Joe called The Max. And The Max is one of the least expensive animated shows I've ever seen, but they were absolutely brilliant in figuring out how to get the maximum, no pun intended, out of their animation. And they produced a dynamite looking show that was very, very inexpensive to do. But you have to take the time, and you need people who are smart enough to know how to do all the tricks that enable you to capitalize on that. Now, I'm sorry we never got to do more with the Slaughterhouse, which is like this conglomeration of all kinds of wrecked machinery and equipment and everything else. And I thought it would have been a fun thing to explore. And if we had done a 3rd season of G.I. Joe at Sunbow, I probably would have advocated, doing a few stories set there.
I love the evil cackle from Baroness when she's gotten away with another scheme.
Yeah.
A couple minutes ago, we saw Cobra Commander in now going through the snake form transformation, and everyone knows Chris Slaughter was a brilliant actor, but he's basically dying in this movie, and he gives a death performance for quite a few minutes where he's getting weaker and losing his mind, and I think that's one of his greatest performances.
It was. Somebody asked me about this just today, and I said, Chris was a great actor, but he couldn't outrun his demons. And eventually, a lot of problems he had caught up with him. And I'm not saying that as a slam against him. We enjoyed working with Chris. He always brought 110% to every show, every recording. He never shortchanged us on performance. But he had personal problems, and sometimes the problems, got to be a little too much. Flint Dilley told a story once about getting a phone call at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and it's the Santa Monica police, and they say, "We got this guy, Chris Latta. Do you want to come and bail him out?"
Oh boy.
And Flint's thinking, "Do we need him tomorrow?" Oh, damn it. Yes, we're recording. Okay, I'll be down. Chris, I don't want to say anything, let's just be respectful for him. He never shortchanged anybody he worked for. He gave 110%. He was tons of fun in the recording booth. And I wish he could have found some way of finding, inner balance, inner peace, so that he could still be with us and still be entertaining kids.
Yeah. One of my favorite expressions from Gorilla Monsoon, a wrestling commentator and a wrestler too. He always used to tell on commentary when a wrestler would get trapped in a submission hold that's inescapable, like the Cobra Clutch or the Camel Clutch, or he would always say, "How do you get out of it? Don't get in it." And I think that applies to a lot of the addiction problems too. Yeah, I always say that to kids. How do you get out of those? Don't get in them. Don't start.
Yeah. Now, I will say this particular scene, they're a little too point blank, to be honest with you. I envisioned it as across a very wide space. Yeah. And more like the prison break scene earlier on. And, they're virtually within spitting distance of one another.
I mean, one Viper there was a foot away and just shot above his shoulder.
Oh, yeah.
They went to the Imperial Academy of
I guess, yeah. Now, I got to say something else here. Let's just go off on Star Wars for a second. The Imperial troopers in Star Wars, they were excused for their bad shooting because they had been told to let them get away so they could follow them to the base.
Right.
That's established, okay? They were missing deliberately. And now we've got the trope of the Imperial stormtroopers who can't hit anything, which I admit I've had some fun with myself. I had a photo of a bunch of the 501st guys in a public restroom standing at urinals, and I put in the caption of one of them saying, "Man, we can't hit anything, can we?"
We just saw a trickle of blood there, and it wouldn't have been necessary. He's just being slapped around, but that really tells you how hard those slaps are.
Oh yeah. Now you also see here a little bit of Geiger influence, and that I did not write into the story. That was something that Marvel's designers chose to add, and I don't find fault with it. I mean, it's good, it's spooky. It certainly fits the flavor of the story. Yeah.
And it's finally something that can incapacitate Sarge for a moment. Yeah. Because he's a hard guy to keep down. So something weird. Yeah. What's that line? It's a great line in the thing.
I want to say one thing, if I may, just excuse me.
Go for it. Oh, go for it.
One thing I would criticize the animators on: you could never keep his hat on model. He wears 40 different hats in this movie. Where does he keep them?
Well, just like the real Sarge.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, just that you need something weird and otherworldly to incapacitate him for a moment, because otherwise, if it's just human, what chance does it have? We've already established that he lays to waste armies of bats. Any human being, even a super clone soldier like Serpentor, isn't really a match for him.
He unscrews a bolt with his thumbnail. Okay, he is tough. Okay,
that man has the constitution of a vending machine.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the key to the character, because when we got him, we were trying to figure out how to use him, and we just realized, don't avoid the super wrestler, don't avoid the pro wrestler, lean into that as hard as you can, and he's just like indestructible. He is almost a superhero.
Hawk is another fantastic part of this movie. He just gets to be as Hawk ever is in this movie.
Yes, that is one thing I was happy with.
And the Rawhides want to help too. So let's commandeer a tomahawk.
Yeah.
Although it won't start, so why don't we get the mute Hulk to hop on board and give it a jump start?
Yeah.
Oh, that's later, maybe.
Yeah.
No, it is. It's this moment right here.
Our Scooby-Doo moment.
Yeah. Literally with the with Order covering his head. Uh-oh. Order snacks? Was that ever part of the script?
Yeah. There we have a parachute in the background.
It's all out warfare here. And here's where it gets weird.
Yeah.
The vine bombs.
Yeah. Now, I have mentioned this before. I'll mention it again. I had seen the movie Lawrence of Arabia. And early in the movie, there's a scene where these Bedouin women are acting as human air raid sirens. And when they see the Turkish Air Force approaching, they turn to the camp and they give this incredibly shrill, trilling sound as a warning. And I thought that would be great if we had the Cobra battle cry to be something like that. Cobra, and just this really incredibly high-pitched trill. We had Dick Gautier cast as Serpentor. And I think we actually wrote the script before Gautier was cast as Serpentor. But, I mean, even for the TV show. But in any case, we get into the recording booth, and Dick's doing a great job. And then he goes, Cobra, la, 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 la. And I go, whoa, stop. I said, give me 5 minutes. I'll come up with a better battle cry. And they're going, no, it's fine. It's fine. I said, no, please. It is not going to work. Trust me. Let me come up with a better battle cry. Just give me 5 minutes. And, you know, they were committed to it. So we went with Cobra, la, 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 la.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah. I mean, he was doing the best he can. And he was great as Serpentor, but the voice was just too low.
Yeah.
You know.
And it is off. I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, there it is right there. Oh dear.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of options, and I just wonder what would have happened if you had been given that 5 minutes.
There's a couple of places where I asked, just give me a moment to come up with a better line. I mean, you know, Cobra La, for instance, when they fell in love with it, I was begging them. I said, no, let me come up with something better. And no, we like it fine as it is. There's a little bit of Dune influence there.
Oh yeah, the worm. Yeah.
Worm, yeah.
What do you remember? What an alternative, or have you ever thought about what an alternative Cobra La battle cry would be?
I didn't even get that far. I just said, give me some time to think of an alternative. And between myself, Flint Dilley, Steve Gerber, and everybody else we had in the office, we could have brainstormed a better name for Cobra La in, 5 minutes flat. Yeah. But they fell in love with it. They locked into it, and that's what we ended up with.
And sometimes it's just a case of, time is money. This is a kid's show and a kid's toy, and stop overthinking this. But it's like, sometimes it is just that 5 minutes.
Say that you can overthink some things, but I don't think you can ever overthink improving something. Mm-hmm. I have been on live action shoots where people are presenting ideas to the director, and the director sometimes goes, "That's a great idea. We're going to incorporate it," and other times, "That's a great idea, but it would take too much time and it would throw the production schedule off to do it. But thank you for thinking of it." And I can understand with the movie, by the time we actually got into the recording studio, visually we were locked in. There were not a lot of changes we could provide visually, which was why I was begging them. I said, give me time to write alternate lines that, Flint would drive the voice actors and the editors on Transformers nuts, because Flint Flint would be in the recording sessions and he'd go, that doesn't work. Give me a few moments. And he would change lines. And by the time the actors get the script has already gone to storyboard, and the storyboard artists have already storyboarded the dialogue the way it was written in the script. And then they get dialogue that doesn't match what's in the script, and they've got to redo the storyboard to match it. Flint would do that. Once or twice, I suggested very minor tweaks to lines just to make them a little clearer. But here, I thought it's a feature film. Let's try to be the best we possibly can.
Yeah.
And
we just saw the death of Duke.
Yeah.
Was that your idea? Let's kill Duke off?
Oh yeah. I killed him deader than a mofo.
Deader than disco.
Yeah. I had been urging Hasbro ever since I came on board. This is a war show. We have got to show consequences of war. We can't just have everybody doing these, incredible, dangerous things with explosion and fire and everything else, and then walking away scot-free. So Hasbro let me injure people in an episode as long as they came back in the next episode, ready for the fight.
Yeah.
When we got around to the movie, I said, you're planning on getting rid of some of these characters from the plot line. Let's kill one of them off. We can absolutely do that. And by the time we figured out that Falcon would be Duke's brother, it became obvious Duke, because he was slated to be removed from the product line, Duke would be the sacrificial lamb. So I wrote the original ending where he dies. And visually, you look at it, it's pretty obvious that he's died.
It's become a running joke on my channel. Whenever anybody dies on a commentary we watch, we go, he's gone into a coma.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Hasbro liked it so much, they told the guys doing the Transformers movie, hey, why don't you kill Optimus Prime?
So that's your fault too.
Well, as I pointed out at the time, you can't kill a robot. You can crush it. You can run it over with a steamroller. You can blow it into little bits. You can melt it down, and you can always fix it as good as new. And a robot dying doesn't have the impact of a human being dying.
Mm-hmm.
Then on top of that, they kill Optimus Prime, and they release the Transformers movie. And I've made this comment before. The audience for G.I. Joe was the TV show was roughly 12 years of age. A 12-year-old at least intellectually knows people can get killed in combat. And if they're watching a movie where one of the characters gets killed, it shocks them, it saddens them, but they realize this sort of thing can happen.
Yeah.
Also, at age 12, most of them are allowed to go to the movies by themselves. The audience for Transformers was targeted at about 9 to 10. Those kids frequently have to go to the movies with their parents. So I always felt sorry for the parents who went to the Transformers movie, because for all they could understand, the script might have just as well been in Mandarin Chinese. They had no idea what's going on. They have no idea what anybody's talking about. It's just like this hallucination going on all the time with things changing and swirling and everything else. And then all of a sudden in the middle of it, the kids start screaming and crying. And the parents are going, what happened? And it's like, hey, killed Optimus Prime. And they got a lot of negative feedback from that, as well they should, because that was not the kind of movie where you can kill off Optimus Prime.
I have firsthand experience of that. My brother took me to see it, and he was a few years older than me, and it was very, very sad. Yeah. And I remember hearing the audience cry, but I also remember my brother telling my mom when we got home, how was the movie? And my brother said it was a nightmare. The entire audience of little children sobbing, weeping in sorrow. Like, what was this movie? And meanwhile, I'm like, it was great. It ended fine. He redeemed himself. It was a great death, Mom.
But I mean, it's well, I mean, there are kids that are more mature. There are kids that are ready to accept those things. But
I was raised on, you mentioned earlier the Russians fighting the Nazis. I was raised on hearing about my, family members fighting the Nazis in the Second World War and throughout history. So I think I was more familiar with just war and the consequences of war in general than your average 10-year-old.
Yeah. The reaction to it was so extreme. They put in the line, he's in a coma, and then they added a line at the end of the movie that he's
gonna be okay.
Yeah. And I really said, no, this is the one we can kill. This is the one we can do that. But in retrospect, it was probably just as well we didn't kill him, because then somebody would have had a tough time trying to bring him back in the regular series. So,
I mean, no one's ever really gone. Just look at anything in Marvel, right? Which superhero has ever died and stayed dead? So it's just funny how we always go.
Captain Marvel, the original Krell warrior, Captain Marvel. He died and he stayed dead.
There's one.
Then they had a whole bunch of replacement Captain Marvels after him. But the original hang on a second.
I mean, they've even got the multiverse now where they can just rip open a portal and say, okay, well, you don't get your original guy back, but here's a guy who's just like him.
I don't have it. It's in my long box. I've got the Death of Captain Marvel. And, it is such a relief to see a comic book character killed and stay dead.
For now. I'll say for now.
I can't remember if it was Roy Thomas or, who else could it have been? We'll say for the moment Roy Thomas, but somebody once observed, in comics, they're only dead if you have a body, and even then, only maybe.
That's great. We saw Cobra Commander slither away, and what a sad end to such a zany, fun character.
Yeah.
Just fate worse than death.
Yeah.
Although he does pop up just for a second to have a little slithery hero moment.
Yeah.
Now it's time for the Rawhides to earn their stripes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we mentioned earlier the Joes got routed because they just had no idea how to fight this enemy.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think what advantage do they have now going into here?
Just experience.
Experience and maybe revenge. Now they're motivated by revenge for what happened to Duke.
Yeah. And they also are aware of what the stakes are now.
Plus, they had the element of surprise too, which is what Cobra Law had in the first encounter.
Yeah.
Wow. It's wild seeing all these little cameo appearances by Joes who don't even get a line, but you see Iceberg in there, and Craig Case was earlier in the movie. I know Mike.
I was trying to work as many of them in as possible.
There's Footloose.
Yeah.
So you would actually write in the script, Footloose is there punching even if he didn't have a line?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I tried to include as many characters as I could. I knew every single Joe character, even the Cobra characters, there would be some kid in the audience that was their favorite character. And, we had to have them in. And if
Barbecue is there?
They'd be disappointed.
Airtight, Breaker. That's wild. I thought that was just the animators just grabbing someone off the animation chart, but it was actually you.
Well, I could have. I probably gave them a list of all the characters and said, these characters have been captured, these haven't been captured. I mean, we just allowed people to the exact staging, that was the storyboard department. I fully acknowledge that. But, I indicated where a lot of the characters were to be, make their appearance.
And that's the level of caring that Sunbow had over other animation studios, especially Deke later on. Like writers who actually knew what they were talking about. And that should go without saying, but sometimes it didn't. Like you had writers on some of the other shows later on writing, and they didn't even know who they were writing.
Oh, we had that, unfortunately, on G.I. Joe. And this was Tunnel Rat getting swallowed by something. So, of course, he's in his element.
Right. He's in a tunnel. And he giggles as he comes out.
Blows out, yeah. We had a few instances where freelancers would pitch things to us or write a script for us, and they either didn't get a character or they didn't get the show. There was one incident where we had a pitch that Cobra was trying to frame General Hawk by faking security camera footage of him robbing a 7-Eleven. And I go, no, not a 7-Eleven. If you said he's robbing Fort Knox, okay, well that is a G.I. Joe size, crime that we could work with.
And he would have access to it that normal people wouldn't.
But a 7-Eleven, come on. I mean, there was a show at the time on the air based on Private Benjamin. And Private Benjamin, if you aren't familiar with it, Goldie Hawn in the movie version played a spoiled young woman who almost on a whim enlists in the army and gradually learns to be a grown-up, is basically what it boils down to. And by the end of the movie, she has become a grown-up, responsible person. And it's not a bad movie. I wouldn't say it's terrible. So, it's a fun comedy, and you take it, there's only so seriously you can take it. But in the TV show, the woman who was the commanding officer of her unit, they did an episode where this commanding officer works as a waitress in a sleazy bar because she's trying to get in touch with her feminine side. And I know of no military personnel, male or female, who would do that. Absolutely not a commander of any kind. Nobody would do anything like that. And the show just, they had no idea what they were doing militarily. I would honestly say G.I. Joe is a more accurate depiction of the military than the TV show Private Benjamin.
This multi-location battle sequence is fantastic. One of the highlights of the movie. You got Falcon getting basically hanging on for dear life against Serpentor. That's a lot of fun to watch. These two ninjas basically going at it. And then Sarge and Nemesis Enforcer are the two big heavy hitters pounding on each other. Yeah. And I think it's cool how many children throughout the years have gone up to Sergeant Slaughter and asked him not about the time he fought the Iron Sheik or Nikolai Volkov, but the time he fought Nemesis Enforcer, as if it was a real fight. And he humors them, talks about what a tough opponent he was.
This is our battle royale.
Yeah.
This is a bunch of guys in the ring pounding the crap out of each other.
Even Cobra Commander getting involved one last time.
Well, I mean, that is what you have to do in this type of story. This is not a drama. This is not a literary work in the sense that it is aspiring to high art. This is trying to be as entertaining an action adventure story as it possibly can. And we're trying for it to make sense. We're trying for it to be as much fun and as intelligent as we can possibly do it. When you get to in an action adventure story, you get to this point and you have to have the moment where Popeye beats up Bluto, where James Bond defeats Oddjob. You need that scene because the audience has been sitting there anxious, waiting for that moment where good triumphs. Mm-hmm. So that's what we do here.
The mud-like substance has finally hit the fan, and it's not mud.
Yeah.
I love this by hook or by crook way of beating Serpentor. So he doesn't overpower him, or
just
slipped on a banana peel.
Yeah,
kind of.
Well, that is actually the way the dancer Isadora Duncan died. She was a famous, scandalous dancer in the 1910s, 1920s, and she was in a sports car, one of those low-slung English sports cars with the wire rim wheels. And she had a long scarf on, and they took off, and the scarf got tangled in the wheel and broke her neck.
Oh, no.
You know, which is a quick but really oddball way to go, you might say.
Yeah. And Falcon
I was surprised they let him get away with jabbing Globulus in the eye with his wand, because I thought
they cut away from it, but they cut back to it, and you see the result, and it is pretty brutal.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
He's trying to break Falcon's neck, so I mean, go for it.
Now, how much better would this performance have been if they let Burgess Meredith do the Mickey voice from Rocky? I'm idolize you bum.
Well, originally Globulus, as the name would suggest, was a far more rotund character. When I originally wrote him, I envisioned him more like Charles Laughton in Sign of the Cross, where he plays Nero. And I just imagine him being carried about on a litter at all times. He's this big, apparently corpulent, very round, very soft-looking character. He's eating grapes. No, it wasn't grapes. It was mice. Yeah, he's eating mice and things like this. Just this sybaritic, hedonistic character. And you think he can't possibly be a physical threat to anybody. And then when he's finally forced to confront Sarge, he says, "Oh, very well, I suppose I must." And he gets off the litter, and all of a sudden he is like kung fu expert. He moves fast, deadly. Every blow hits. He's kicking the crap out of the Sarge at the start of the fight. And they said, "Oh, we can't do that. We can't have a big fat character." So they redesigned him that way. Which it works. I mean, I'm not gonna. It's not. I'm just saying this to let people know what the original concept was. This concept works just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Burgess Meredith was a lot of fun to work with too. I mean, he was great in the recording studio, but at lunch we took a break and we're out there, and I'm sitting beside him. And I said, "You're going to have to forgive me, but I got to ask this question." And I saw him steeling himself for yet another Penguin question. And I said, "Tell me about the rabbits, George," which is a line from Of Mice and Men, which was this great 1930s movie that he was in with Lon Chaney Jr. Lon Chaney Jr. actually got nominated for an Academy Award for playing Lenny in Of Mice and Men. And Burgess Meredith looked and he laughed, and he was good friends with John Steinbeck, the author of Mice and Men, and he was telling us stories about visiting Steinbeck and all this other stuff.
Oh, here comes the good news.
Coma, good, yeah.
Oh, yay!
Yay! Mm-hmm. I don't know how many of you have seen the original anime. It was called Star Blazers in America. It's Space Battleship Yamato in the original Japanese. But it had one of the all-time best endings of anything, where they have battled their way across the galaxy and have battled their way back in order to save the Earth. The half the crew is dead by this point. The captain of it is dying, but the rest of the crew doesn't know it. And the hero's girlfriend is in a coma, believe it or not. And as they're approaching Earth, the hero takes her out of the sick bay in the Yamato and brings her up on the bridge. And he's saying, look, we saved Earth. It's still here. And the doctor, who was the comic relief character, he's with the captain as the captain dies. And he comes in to tell everybody in the bridge that the captain has died. And just as he does, the girlfriend opens her eyes and everybody is rejoicing that she's woken up. And you've got this shot of the doctor with just this expression on his face. He can't tell anybody now. This is not the time to tell them. This is the time for celebration and joy. And so he has to keep the sorrow in himself. And I thought that was one of the best endings of any TV show I'd ever seen. We weren't able to do something like that at the end, but I tried to have some sense of the sacrifice was worth it.
When did you find out that they had decided to just have Duke in a coma and bring him back? Like, was that something after everything had been recorded and already animated? So it was a surprise to you to see that?
Yeah, they basically passed down the what do you call it, the chain of command and said, oh, by the way, Duke isn't dead. He's in a coma because, the reaction to Optimus Prime dying was too severe. And I begged them. I said, no, you can get away with it. And in retrospect, no, because Duke stayed in the product line and was, a major character in the series afterwards, comics and movies and comics and video and everything else. So in that sense, they were right.
It just wouldn't have had the same weight if it was Crankcase, though.
Yeah.
Or Frostbite.
That's true.
But that final scene doesn't work with that change, with Falcon telling Jinx, looking up at the sky and saying, thanks, big brother. Like, thanks for what? He's cooling his heels in a hospital. Like, what? There's really no sacrifice has been made here.
Yeah. I mean, people have asked me if you could have done anything you wanted to do for G.I. Joe the movie, what would you have done? With any cast of characters. And I tell them I would have done Shipwreck on Shore Leave in Tijuana. Stumbles across a Cobra plot, and it is just him in one ridiculous adventure after another. The Joes get involved, and there's a big fight, of course. Yeah. But I just, I love Shipwreck. Every time I could find a chance to use him, I tried to work him in. And, we squeezed him in a few places here, but, he was also slated to go out of the product line. He's one of the most popular characters now. So yeah,
it kind of makes you wonder why they weren't paying more attention to who were the crowd favorites. Actually talk to kids and say, well, that probably would have gotten them in trouble walking around talking to kids at schoolyards. Hey, who's your favorite toy? Get out of here.
Oh, no, they would do that. They would hire research people. They would bring kids in and they'd sit them down with the toys and they'd say, well, tell us who you think this character is. And I say that in the sense of they would design characters, come up with character concepts, and then they'd want to see how kids actually reacted to them. In Humanoids, for instance, when they showed them to kids and mom wasn't in the room, kids loved them. Oh, that great, really gross out monsters. Can't wait to see this. When it actually got on the product shelf, I'm not spending $20 for this, and I can't blame them.
I don't want that demonic thing in my house. So.
I mean, we did the Garbage Pail Kids animated show, and literally the night before it premiered, CBS got cold feet and yanked it. Really? They had paid for the whole thing. It was completely done. They had been advertising it. And literally the night before they said, no, we're not going to put this on the air. And eventually it popped up. It exists. Yeah, it popped up on video eventually, and you can find it. I did 2, 3, maybe 4 episodes for them, but somebody listened to a mom, and you can't, depending upon the age of the child you're pitching the product to, you can't discount mom's input, because mom typically makes that final choice.
She pays for it.
Yeah.
Kind of try to have to appease both.
Exactly.
So big red truck is mom doesn't see the harm in that, and the kids love the big red truck, or the blonde crew cut guy in the OD green.
Well, pants. I mean, even the most extreme characters in Cobra were not gross. I mean, they were oddball, they were weird looking, but they weren't, if you saw a person like that in real life, you'd go, well, that's an unusual looking person, but they're still clearly a human being. Kind
of like a Bond villain, Destro is basically a Bond villain.
Well, they're all Bond villains in a very real sense of the word. If you've ever seen You Only Live Twice, there's like about 40,000 guys in jumpsuits running around fighting ninjas at the end of the movie. I love the state. I mean, I used to love You Only Live Twice. It used to be my favorite Bond movie, but as time goes on, I realize it's the Bond movie where the series jumped the shark. And it just went over the top in silliness. And it kind of set the stage for what ended up happening with the Roger Moore Bonds. But I got to say that the fight in the volcano at the end with the rocket launch crew and the ninjas descending on ropes and explosions everywhere, that is one of the best staged action scenes anybody has ever done. And if you just want to see a good action scene, watch the climax of You Only Live Twice. It's the aces. They did it perfectly.
So you mentioned Garbage Pail Kids being buried and hard to find. Another hard to find story is, I thought you were going to say, when you're asked if you would have done something different with the movie, in my mind, my alternate G.I. Joe movie, end of the G.I. Joe Sunbow run, is it was a Kindle World story, The Most Dangerous Man in the World. And hard to find these days, but it's a buried treasure. So for all the Joe fans out there, I'm always recommending hunt it down, find it. It's the last coup de grace of the G.I. Joe Sunbow run.
I have told fans who have asked me about it, they said, why don't you have it done as a graphic novel? I pitched it to IDW, not knowing that IDW had already lost the license. They just hadn't announced that they had lost the license. They turned it down. What's the company that's doing it now? I'm trying to remember the comic book.
I know IDW was doing it.
I tell fans, by all means, if you want to write to them or email them and say, why don't you adapt it as the Great Lost G.I. Joe episode, I'll be happy to have that conversation. I'll be happy to either hand the story over to somebody who wants to adapt it or to adapt it myself. But I can't sell it on my own anymore because the program that I was selling it on, the Kindle Worlds program that Amazon had, that's defunct. The characters are all owned by Sunbow, so I can't use the characters. Someone said, why don't you go through and just change the names of everything? And it's like, I've got like 500 vehicles and characters. That's, yeah, right. Change the names on all of them. And, Sunbow came up with most of the best names anyway. So I don't know what I could do to come up with anything as good or better. So
doing a quick search here, I see that IDW is apparently losing the license for it. I can't find who's getting the license, but whoever ends up with it, I never, tell viewers of the channel, go do this and, go pester this company or go right to that company. That's their choice if they want to. But in this particular case, I will strongly recommend whoever ends up with that Joe comic, send them an email, a nice, friendly, hopeful email, and say,
friendly email. Just if they have an idea how many people would like to see it, like I said, I'll be delighted to have that conversation.
Because I read that Saturday morning 4-issue G.I. Joe comic, which totally recaptures the Sunbow cartoon magic. And if they can do that, there's no reason they can't do the most dangerous man in the world. And that could be even more than 4 parts. And it is just like a time warp. It's like the lost script.
Well, it's also interesting in a broader sense. The last Predator movie, Prey, has shown there is a different way to do sequels and follow-ups to various franchises. You don't have to continue the storyline. You could say, well, what would happen if a Predator was attacking, I think they're Cheyenne Indians in North America 400 years before Columbus arrives.
And it's not even a prequel. It's like a sidequel.
Exactly. And there have been any number of comics that have done crossovers, or they've done stories where characters have left the main franchise and come over to something else. I mean, for heaven's sakes, Archie. I mean, if Archie can incorporate the Punisher in the Archie universe and have it work as well without doing violence to the character, that's the wrong word to pick, without subverting the character's Marvel interpretation, nonetheless have him fit and work in the Archie world. It worked perfectly. That's one of my favorite comic books. I
didn't know about that.
Archie. It's tons of fun.
Frank Castle is one of my favorite Marvel characters, and I didn't know he appeared in Archie. But I can imagine what that was like, because Frank can blend in when he wants to for a few minutes at a time.
It's really cool, because what happens is there is a dangerous criminal who happens to look just like Archie, who escapes, and Frank's trying to track him down. And, he spots Archie and he assumes Archie's the guy. And it's just a crazy story.
I think the really cool thing about Punisher fans is when we're talking about the Punisher, a lot of Punisher fans will just refer to him as Frank. So you've got the big, you get the big heroes like Captain America and Wolverine and Superman and Frank. He's just Frank.
Yeah, and that works. And there have been any number of aliens stories that have taken place in other venues. And I think Prey has shown filmmakers you don't have to continue the storyline. You can do a brand new, different interpretation of the story. We've seen people do steampunk versions of various characters. Alan Moore, for heaven's sakes, he robs graves and he props the corpses up and takes photographs of them and sells them as brand new graphic novels. But he has taken characters out of their original settings and put them in brand new settings, and the stories, they've worked for the most part.
Yeah.
There's a few things he's done where I just go, you got to yuck on everybody's yum, is the way I put it.
Well, Marvel is pushing the whole multiverse thing, the variants and stuff like that. So it's not like anybody's asking the G.I. Joe movie as it exists to be wiped out. It will always still exist for the people who enjoy it, or just even enjoy parts of it. It'll always be there for you to enjoy. But not to turn this whole thing into a pushing the most dangerous man in the world, because you released it and it was available when it was available, and it might never surface again. But I'll always be pushing, because that's kind of what I do. I find old things and I kind of clean them off and light them up and say, hey, even though this thing is considered old junk by some people, this thing is still very, very pretty. And The Most Dangerous Man in the World is one of the prettiest G.I. Joe stories I ever read. And I'll always push for it to resurface and take on a new form of media for new fans to enjoy it.
It was tons of fun to write. And I just hope everybody who read it got as much enjoyment out of reading it as I got out of writing it.
I appreciate you writing it, and I appreciate you chatting with me today.
Okay.
For the G.I. Joe movie, I never imagined as a little kid sitting and watching the 5-parter every day after school. One day I'd be sitting here and talking to the man who wrote the thing. So this has been an absolute pleasure for me. Thanks for hanging out, chatting. It's been a lot of fun.
My delight. Thank you.
Do you have anything you want to plug? Any appearances or any projects?
Not at the moment. I will be at Alpha Omega Con in late September, Saturday the 24th, and I forget where it is. It's in Southern California, but you can look it up. And if you're interested, I'll be there. And that's the only one that I have on schedule this year. And
you'll only be talking in humanoids there, though, right?
No, it's a Christian comics convention, and so we will probably not be discussing in humanoids. We may be discussing Al Hartley's Archie stories.
Hopefully this commentary, it's answered a lot of questions I've had about your thought process of writing the script. So hopefully this commentary will do that for a lot of fans too, and you'll get asked some fresh new questions, maybe about Thundar and some of the other shows you've worked on, and some of the questions about Cobra Law and the Cobra Law battle cry. And Lieutenant Falcon in this movie can, finally be put to rest, and maybe kind of like your conversation with Burgess Meredith. It's always a good idea to ask about something that the creator or the writer hasn't been asked 1,000 times about.
Yeah. Just don't ask me any questions about the little clowns at Happy Town.
All right. Thanks again, Buzz.
Okay.
Very much appreciated. Okay. And thank you all for listening along. And until next time, Nerdmas and Yo Joe!